Hi, I'm Carl Feagans. I'm an archaeologist at the Land Between the Lakes, and I'm here tonight to talk to you a little bit about the iron furnace industry at the Land Between the Lakes, the past, the present, and the future, mainly looking at the preservation, the history, and some of the future of what we'd like to take care of or like to do at the iron furnaces that we have left. What I'll do is I'll read a short little introduction first, and then I'll go through a slideshow. The lighting is great here. The first time I gave this talk was a few years back at the Kentucky Heritage Council's conference, and the lighting was really bad, and I had contacts in. I whipped out some reading glasses, and I did like this, and I think they thought I was going to read the whole paper like that. So, but the lighting's really good, so I don't have to do that, so I can read this really easily. Here we go. Fortunes were made and lost by those who invested in the iron industry in the Cumberland Valley of Kentucky and Tennessee. Many people, willing and unwilling, arrived at Western Kentucky and Tennessee from across America and beyond to work in the iron furnaces before the Civil War. There was a promise of prosperity and new beginnings for some, the promise of forced servitude through slavery and backbreaking work that came for others. Regardless of how they arrived, the addition of people and industry created communities. And it was within these communities, most of them now gone from the landscape entirely, that countless individuals lived, worked, and sometimes died to transform the earth into iron. Iron furnaces ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for months on end. The roar of the blast furnace and the heat from the fire were continuous, and the furnace cast an eerie glow that would light up the night throughout the area. Smoke from the charcoal production hung in the air, and the hills and dales surrounding the furnace were quickly stripped bare of trees, ore, and limestone. Being near a furnace town meant coexisting with a living inferno, a mostly tame beast, which could transform ore to iron at a price, one paid in earth and blood. Among the four people perhaps most responsible for starting the earliest iron furnace communities around the land between the rivers were John and Samuel Stacker, brothers who began buying iron and coaling lands in Trigg County in the late 1830s through the early 1840s. This was despite, or perhaps as a result of, the economic depression around 1837. Many of their investments were conducted in partnership with a third businessman, Dr. Thomas Tennessee Watson. Originally from Virginia by way of Nashville, Watson was a physician and in search of investment opportunities to make his fortune when he decided to try his hand at the iron industry. He later partnered with a fourth personality, already very familiar with iron, Daniel Hillman. After spending at least a year acquiring lands and other interests, Watson built the Empire Furnace in 1843 on the west bank of the Cumberland River, just south of what is now the border of Lyon and Trigg counties. At 35 feet tall and almost as wide, it produced about 1,836 tons of metal during one 45-week burn. Production at a furnace typically stopped only during the coldest months of the year. Dr. Watson's success with Empire caught the attention of Daniel Hillman, and together they partnered to establish the firm Watson and Hillman. By 1845, they had built the Fulton Furnace just north of Empire in Caldwell County, which is now Lyon County. But it was a desire, perhaps even a dream of Dr. Watson to eventually establish a furnace more centrally located between Fulton and Empire. By April of 1846, the father of Trigg County's iron industry, Dr. Thomas Tennessee Watson, would succumb to an unknown ailment or injury, which would take his life at just age 40 or 41 years. Before his death, Dr. Watson had the presence of mind to complete his will, through which he left most of his personal estate to his daughter Martha, along with $10,000 paid over time to each of his illegitimate children, Jane and Thomas Holden, and John and Lucy Mina Bradley. Through his will, Watson also freed 14 of the 55 slaves held at his estate. Though he continued doing business for a short time as the Watson Hillman firm, Daniel Hillman eventually expanded his business and constructed Center Furnace in 1852, just 2.5 miles west of the Fulton Furnace and Empire Furnace in Trigg County. If indeed it was a dream of Dr. Watson's, the Center Furnace came through big. During a 46-week burn in 1856, the furnace produced an astonishing 2,140 tons of metal. It was the only furnace to actually operate through the Civil War in Trigg County and probably through the entire Cumberland Valley. So, with that, a little intro, a little background about the iron furnace industries. This is a picture right here we've been looking at for a little while, waiting for me to start. This is the Center Furnace itself. So, the iron industry in the world began probably in India and again in Mesopotamia. We're looking at thousands of years ago, smelting started happening. Probably the earliest iron was very likely meteoric. They found meteoric iron and they'd already been working with bronze and copper, and so they tried their skills at iron smelting it, see what it would do, a little bit of experimentation. So iron's been around for quite a while. The first iron furnace in the United States would have been in Virginia, in Falling Creek. The date eludes me right now, but very early in the 1700s. It never opened. They actually ended up having to close. It turns out the original landowners didn't like Europeans coming over and just building things, so they had an uprising. The Native Americans pushed them back out. Some of the remnants of that furnace is still there. The first actual iron furnace to actually operate was in Massachusetts, the Saginaw Iron Works in New England, and it ran for quite a few years and produced pig iron. Pig iron is a type of, it's wrought iron, and they call it pig iron because when they let the iron flow, it goes into these sand molds. It goes into a central sand mold and peels off into smaller molds off to the right, and it creates these ingots, these large ingots, and it looks like piglets at a sow, so they call it pig iron. So that's where the name of it comes from. Wrought iron was used for a lot of things, including nails, household goods, toys, beds, fencing, but nails, lots and lots of nails. There were rolling mills that would roll out, heat up the iron ingots and then roll them out and create, they would stamp out these nails, and you get these kind of shapes of nails you see to the right versus the wire nails you see. Those are our modern nail to the left. At the Land Between the Lakes, we had 8 furnaces. Of those 8 furnaces, there were 2 that are not currently in the boundaries of Land Between the Lakes. We still kind of call them our own. That's Peytona Furnace. In the south, US 79 rolls right through that furnace. There are some scattered bricks and slag in the area off to the shoulders of that, the highway that we can find, but that furnace is all but gone. It's completely obliterated. Then the Empire Furnace, that was the first furnace that was mentioned, and that's up here. That's the one that the first furnace that Tennessee Watson and Hillman got together with. That is now under the water. It's under Lake Barkley. After that, the next 2 furnaces that are Mammoth and Fulton. Fulton's the other furnace that Tennessee Watson built. Those 2 furnaces are pretty much gone. The only reason we can see them now is because at Winter Pool, the lake rescinds, and we can see the mounds of the furnaces. If you ever have a chance to go hiking out at the Fulton furnace, you hit the light just right, the beach is just blue with slag. The slag is one of the byproducts of the iron furnace industry. It comes from the impurities. The limestone is mixed in with it, and it pulls off the impurities, and you have this glass-like slag that floats to the top, and they break it up and make gravel out of it, but the beach is just blue with slag. And for whatever reason, Our slag in this area has a color of blue. I don't know why. If you go south to Alabama, it's a very dark black or gray color. You go north into Minnesota, Pennsylvania, again, you get that dark black color, but here we have a blue tint to it. There's also Iron Mountain and Laura Furnace. Both of those furnaces are almost completely gone as well. They're not in the lake, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not going to see them. They're just barely a couple of mounds in the landscape. They're covered with leaves, but if you know what you're looking for, and you can go out and find them, you can find traces of slag and find some of the bricks and rocks. Iron Mountain ended up being it was completely dismantled and reused. The parts, the bricks and the blocks were all reused for other buildings elsewhere, and the area ended up being a trash dump for the local residents in the area. So if you go there, we find today garbage. I think I've got a license plate from Chicago, 1946 license plate, really cool. Lots of jars and cans and that kind of thing. So the only two furnaces that we have that are still standing with any remnants are the Great Western Furnace and the Center Furnace. Center Furnace was the picture that we saw in the beginning, and the Great Western Furnace is the most intact stack, and that sits in what was once Model, and before that was once Bass. That was the name of the town, named after the postmaster, and before that it was called Great Western, named after the furnace that was there. But the furnace still stands. 2 towns have come and gone, and the furnace is still there to watch over it all. And that's on if you've ever been to Lamtrina Lakes, just south of the home place is where that's at. The Center Furnace is close to the nature station, and that stack still stands as well. It's deteriorated quite a bit, as you can see here. That picture is from probably 2016 or 2017, actually. So here's the Center Furnace, and you can see this furnace actually ran through the Civil War. It was built in the 1850s, 1858, I think, off the top of my head. But it was one that was used continuously, off and on, I should say. It went into disuse, and it was used again. The last time it was used was from about 1906 or 1904 through 1912. And this picture here, I think, is dated 1919 or 1918. So you can see in just a few short years, about 6 or 8 years, the decay, the deterioration that set in. People quickly started scavenging the bricks and the wood and that kind of thing to reuse. At that time, it wasn't an historic place. It was just an old building. So you want to reuse what you can. And then, of course, here's where it's located at, up here in the Lyon County, where the nature station is. This is the community. I mentioned communities. All of our iron furnaces would have had some sort of a community. It literally took hundreds of people to operate an iron furnace. The men would typically be the ones doing all the hard labor, but we can't discount the work of the women. Their labor was probably equally hard, just different. But there were wives and kids and sisters and daughters there as well. There were also slaves. We had a slave quarters here. This is what we know about the Center Furnace from. This is a map that was reproduced from another map that was made from oral history. And we've actually found that many of these, where the blacksmith shop, for instance, the charcoal shed, the ore lab, these kind of pan out, these locations. We go there and we find artifacts that are consistent with what we see. I did some shovel testing in the charcoal shed. I got a good 15 centimeters of just dense, dark charcoal. Then the Iron Master's house over here, we've done some work there. It's consistent with a house or home. Same thing with the slave quarters, the boarding house. This is where, if you've ever been to the nature station, there's a pavilion. There's 2 pavilions. There's one right by the nature station, then there's another one down near the furnace, and this is where that pavilion is right there, where the boarding house was. There's a trailhead right here for the Honker Trail in modern times, and so you can park in this area where the stable was, and in the Long Creek area, this road goes back towards the Hematite Lake. The Hematite Lake wasn't there during the time of the furnace. There was, however, a pump house back in that area. There was a creek that was, there's some active springs in the area that kept the creek flowing. That's one of the reasons why they had the furnace there. There's quite a bit of ore in the area. We have ore, and there's quarry areas here for limestone, and the ore mounds, and the ore was mined back in this area back here and beyond. And so you had all the things you needed. You had manpower, you had limestone for the flux, you had fourths for the coaling, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and you had the ore itself. And you add the ore, the limestone, and the coal together, and you create a charge, and you're able to produce iron. So the coaling part, we have a mock-up of a hearth on LBL, a little trail behind the furnace. It unfortunately is all but obliterated by the last tornado that rolled through there. Trees dropped on it, and it's in very bad decay. We fixed it once. A tree fell on it, and we did about $3,000 worth of repairs on it, and then the tornado came along and dropped the huge oak on it, and so it's almost completely flattened. Now we're thinking about trying to come up with the funds to rebuild it, maybe put it somewhere where there's less trees, and maybe give it some more visibility. But it's a very interesting, as far as I know, I don't think I've ever seen another mock-up of one of these hearths. And so what they would do is they would essentially clear cut the land, and you can see this is a picture of a charcoal hearth. I don't know that this is LBL, but this is one that TVA, a picture that Tennessee Valley Authority, when they were managing the forest, this is a picture that they had on file, so it could very well be the Land Between the Lakes. But you can see all the trees are cut down, and they cut them in these short cords, and they stack them together, and they cover them with dirt, not clay or mud. They don't want it to be so much airtight as just tight, you know. And the person who's running the collier, he knows by heat, by feel and experience, when to open up holes to let some more air in and when to close them up. And so he's constantly doing that. So this would burn for several days at a time. 10,000 cords of wood is about 500 acres. For 8 furnaces burning 8 to 10 months, they would need about 4,000 acres each of wood just for the coal. So that gives you an idea of how many trees were cut in the area. Luckily, the trees are renewable. We've got a forest full of them back now. That's a lucky thing. But that was not only just for the iron industry on the Land Between the Lakes, but the coal was actually shipped out all around the region. The Tennessee and Cumberland rivers were the interstate highways of commerce for the period. So they would go out in these flat boats and get shipped up and down the rivers. They would go out to the Mississippi and then up the Ohio. This coal would probably go as far away as Pittsburgh. So to give you an idea of some of the research we've done to date, in 1970, J. Milton Henry wrote a book for the Tennessee Valley Authority primarily, although the book is available to the public, and it's out of print right now. It's something that we're working on trying to get back into print, but you can find it occasionally on Amazon for like $180, $200. It's really expensive because people know they can sell it for a lot of money. But the book is really interesting. It's a history of Land Between the Lakes as far back as he could find. He spent probably years researching this. He was from Austin Peay University. That was compiled and printed in 1970. Then Murray State did an oral history program in 1982. I would say actually 1970s through 1982. 82 would probably be when they culminated their oral histories, but they actually interviewed former residents who remembered growing up in the time. We have oral histories from, for instance, Janelle Bogard, and some of many of the families that were prominent in the area that talk about some of the things that happened, the iron furnace. And the iron furnace stuff that she talks about is fascinating. She grew up as a young girl in the center furnace area, the hematite community, and she talks about that at some length. In 2003, we did a Passport in Time project. That's a pit project, if you've ever heard of that. The Forest Service does this. The Forest Service had taken over the land between the lakes by about 99 to 2000. So in 2003, we did a pit project. I say we, like I was there, but I really wasn't. But they actually worked, put some units in around the general store, and we've got tons of artifacts, fascinating artifacts. Fascinating to an archaeologist, probably boring to a lot of people. Look at this, just no rusty nail and a horseshoe, but it's interesting to nerds like me. Murray State came out in 2008. The late Kit Wessler did some geophysical surveys. He used the Fluxgate gradiometer, and this is a high-speed, low-drag piece of machinery that uses magnetic resonance to basically look at the ground and determine where man-made stuff might be. It's fascinating technology, but I'm going to show you a slide in a minute. You can see some of the weaknesses with it, but it worked out really well. They got some good data from it. In 2017, we had Central Michigan University come out and do some shovel testing with us. We did some shovel test pits at the Laura furnace, and we were trying to locate one of the roads out there. We were thinking that maybe slag probably would have been the primary medium, and we did find higher concentrations of slag in some of the test pits. So then 2018, we did some walkover surveys and went primarily around the slave quarters and the iron furnace, iron master's house, which interestingly enough is they're pretty adjacent to each other. We kind of walked around that area, found some new stuff, in the wood line. We were finding field stones that indicate where houses were, some foundation stones, in other words, artifacts, things like that, bricks. So in 2019, we worked again with, let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself. In 2019, we confirmed the location of the charcoal hearth. That was doing some shovel testing there. We tried to do some metal detection to see what we would get. I'll tell you, don't put a metal detector anywhere near an iron furnace. It had to be done just so we could cross that off the list, but it was what we expected. Now, the further you get away from it, the better results you get. But we found that it worked fairly well around the charcoal depot where they stored the charcoal shed, but close to the furnace, everywhere you put it, it just went crazy. Then in 2020, this is during COVID, we actually worked with Murray State. Hey, we were outdoors, so our shovel tests are apart from each other. It was a perfect activity to do during COVID. So that was at the beginning of COVID, I think, before COVID actually was a big thing, so we kind of curtailed it very much after that. But we found some pretty interesting stuff. We did some shovel testing around the Iron Master's house, and that was really good data. So here's some of the stuff that we found. These are some of the artifacts. This is from the general store area. This is a Remington UMC Nitro Club 12 gauge, dates to about 1913 to 1915. This was, and looks like the primer is intact, looking at this. So this would have been something that would have been sold at the general store during the time that it was open. Probably closed. That's probably one of the last things they sold. We have some other bits of sherds and shards here from glass and ceramics. And then here's some of the geophysical survey stuff that we did. This is a map to kind of show you where it's at. Here's the center furnace is here, the nature station where it says museum, and this circled area right here, that's the slave quarters area. Here's a strip that they tested. This gives you a little idea of the topography, and they found some possible sites here that they wanted to go back and open some units up. I'll show you some pictures of that. And this little herringbone effect here, that's what I was telling you about. There are some shortcomings with the gradiometer. If you have metal aglets or something on your shoes, we always try to wear Velcro or and jogging pants or something, no metal, because every time you take a step, you're creating that little blip, and it creates that herringbone effect. And you could tell it was different people with different paces and that kind of thing. But still, we were able to get there's some data in that. You can still see some patterns in there as well. So again, here's that map again. Here's the slave quarters. This is the area where they were doing the testing at. And here's that gradiometer again. So they found these spots here. They went back and did some, put in a unit. And what they found was in two different units, 2 different spots, after the geophys stuff that they did, they found stuff that was consistent with what you might throw under a house that sits on foundation stones. I mean, it's garbage, but that's what archaeologists do. That's just little inside secret. We look at people's garbage. But it's cool garbage. And there's a horseshoe that I was talking about, and some other stuff that I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but we've got it in boxes somewhere. Actually, we photographed that not too long ago. We had some volunteers help us photograph a bunch of that stuff and catalog it. So here's in 2017 doing some shovel testing. What I mentioned about shovel testing is a way that we can get some good statistical surveys of an area. So if I had a field the size of this room, I might put in 2 or 3 rows of shovel tests, and I might squeeze in 4, 16, maybe 12. I might be able to get 12 shovel tests in here to 16 shovel tests, and they're spaced out evenly, right? And that gives us a statistical idea, and we do them. We can do them a couple of ways. We can do them very evenly and ordered like a military formation, or we can stagger them a little bit and get a little bit closer, close that gap a little bit. But it helps us look at, when we start looking at the data, and you'll see some data here in a minute, it'll pop up negative or positive, and we can start seeing some trends, and we can see artifact concentrations, and we can, we record things like depth and types of artifact, whether it was historic or prehistoric. So we get a lot of data that way, statistical data, and then we can go back and put in maybe a unit, a bigger unit, maybe something the size of this table. And then we can go at a depth we need to go to find out what's in there and record things very carefully. So here's us walking over. This is my boss and good friend who happens to be in the room somewhere. We found these foundation stones. They're marked with the little arrows right there. He's trying to duck out of the camera real quick, but I needed him for scale. This is us again doing here's that shovel testing. This is something we did this shovel testing at the boarding house. And one of the things we found, we actually, in this same screen, I got a picture of one of them. I think one must have been in somebody else's hand. There were 2 of these buttons, and they're shell buttons. They're made of shell, mollusk shell. And what you do is you drill those out, and then you drill little holes in them, and you make buttons with them. Fascinating. We found 2 in the same screen. So somebody's shirt, clearly a shirt of some sort. And then there's Chris again running the GPR, the ground penetrating radar. We did a ground penetrating radar survey of that area, looking for any signs of the structure itself. We found the water line. We may have found some foundation stones. So this is the shovel testing we did at the Iron Master's house with Murray State, and that was very productive. Good data from that. These are here's some of the data that I showed you, the results of the shovel test, and you can see they're kind of ordered. They're real close, and the shovel tests weren't as big as these squares. They're really about 30 centimeters in diameter, about 30 centimeters deep, and we try to do a cylinder, not a cone. And you dig a hole, but you want a good cylinder because you're missing a lot of stuff if you do a little cone. So we're able to get a good sample of the ground, but it kind of gives you an idea of where things were. So the green are negative, the purple are positive for both, and then we have positive for prehistoric and historic So this is we actually found one prehistoric here at least, but the rest were positive for historic, and then we have one positive for both there. So we're finding prehistoric and historic in the same place, which is not uncommon. People use the land. We want to use the land for the same reasons. You know, it's a good spot. There's water. There's good hunting. It's on a hill. It's on a flat spot. You know, that we use the land for a lot of the same reasons. So here's the boarding house. We did the shovel testing there as well. We actually did shovel testing. This was for a project here. It was all negative, which is what we wanted. We were thinking about putting in a new road to access the back gate of the nature station, because there's a cemetery back there. We call it, well, I say we, somebody long before me named it Chinese Cemetery, and you'll hear, and this will probably be the only spot where I'll have a chance to make that reference, so let me go ahead and do it now. There is talk of Chinese laborers coming in to work at the iron furnace industry at Land Between the Lakes. It's been a very hard thing to validate. We've actually had two scholars from China, once in the early 2000s and again in 2015, I think. It was the professor, and then his student, then became a professor, was following his footsteps and wanted to follow up on that. And neither visit were they able to validate anything, but we've looked at a lot of records. We did find some census records that show there were a couple of Chinese people in the area. So, you know, you'll hear people say there were no Chinese in the area before a certain date because of the way the expansion, the way the migration worked. But there were a couple of in Paducah. But it was a shirt factory in the census records or something like that, or a shirt laundry service or something, I think. But it's hard to validate. We don't have any artifacts. It's something that's really hard to say, but we hear it all the time. So there's something to it. We just don't know exactly what it is that's to it. But we have the cemetery that is labeled Chinese Cemetery is probably an African-American cemetery. The community that was here was there from the early 1850s through 1912 at least, probably much later, probably to the 30s when Kentucky Woodlands Wildlife took over. So they had to bury somewhere, and that was probably the cemetery they buried at. Let me skip this then, we'll go on to the next thing. So here's a close-up of the Iron Masters furnace, and this was done with Dr. Marcy Ventnor, who also is in the room today, and her students. We did quite a bit of this back here, and the Iron Masters house was probably right here. We found some pretty interesting artifacts. One of them was I want to say we had a purpled wine glass, or a portion of a wine glass that was purpled, and the reason it's purpled is because of what they used to clarify the glass, and for whatever reason it's escaping me right now, the manganese is used to clarify the glass, and it creates a purple effect with ultraviolet light. So it was really fascinating to see something like that. So you know it's over 100 years old. It takes 100 years for that to, or that was also the period when they used manganese to clarify glass. So here's a picture of a shovel test that I mentioned. We do round ones. Some people do them square. The idea is to be consistent. Like I said, this is hopefully a nice cylinder through the ground, 30 centimeters deep, 30 centimeters in diameter. We record all the data on a form like this. We don't dig it with the trowel though. We use a shovel. We use the trowel to kind of clean up the sides and dig out the stuff and you know, that sort of thing. So here's that same area overlaid with the trees, so you can see the road, see its relationship to the road. So we worked along the road in the clearing right here. Here's that clearing, and then we went back into the tree line in the woods, and it's kind of a flat spot there, and then it slopes down in the back. And again, this is where that was right there. So that's some of the archaeology we've done. So we also do preservation in my shop. We're very much involved in preservation. We want to kind of preserve the really cool things that we have. In 1975 and in 1976, the Great Western Furnace and the Center Furnace were both nominated to the National Register and accepted. So they are on the National Register of Historic Places. They're one of three things that we have, I believe, on the land between the lakes that are. Fort Henry is the other one, which is actually Fort Henry's under the lake, so I guess, but we're going to still, we have earthworks, so we're going to claim it anyway. And in the center furnace, in 2008, we did a big vegetation removal. I'm going to show you some pictures of that in a second. We did also a fence removal and replacement in 2017. And then in 2018, we cleaned Thomas Tennessee Watson's grave. He was originally buried next to Empire Furnace. That was the first furnace in the area, the one that he started. But when they flooded the lake, they moved his cemetery. He was the only one there. He moved it up to the center furnace, which is where he dreamed of having a furnace at. So I think it's a good spot for him, actually. He overlooks the furnace now. So here's one of the things I didn't mention is Great Western Furnace got a roof in 2000. Not sure what good it does, but I'm sure it doesn't seem to be hurting it any. TVA, right, one of the last things they did for preservation was to get it cleared to add a aluminum roof. And if you've ever been there, you've probably never noticed it. They did a good job of blending it in, I think. It's not too obtrusive, doesn't stick out. I didn't notice it until I ran across this form, and I was like, "What?" And I went down there and looked at it, and just took a picture. Sure enough, there's a roof there. Take a note of this. This is called a tuyere, these little openings in the furnace. Note that opening right there. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. It was put there because there is an opening inside, and the idea was to keep the rain and trees and critters and vultures and that kind of thing from roosting in there, and it's done a good job. Here's the vegetation removal we did in 2008, and I say we, I wasn't here in 2008, but I've been here about 10 years. My colleagues before me, I knew them personally, and they're the ones that did this vegetation removal. You can't even tell the furnace is there. Look at this, there's that post. That's the same fence post. There's the difference. And here's the furnace here, and here's that big stack behind it, the fence. They also put in a brand new split rail fence in the back and a little walkway up the backside. Well, that fence didn't last very long after that. A tree fell on one side, then it fell on the other side, and we had some problems with it. And so we had the trees cut out, and then we said, we need a new fence. So it was cheaper to put in a new fence than it was to repair the old one, or about as cheap. And that right there, this one didn't last very long either. It weathered away. So we pulled that out completely, and we do have some designs to go back and redo it again. But we put in this black fence here. It's not, the fence itself is coated in a black vinyl, and it makes it much easier for people who want to take pictures. There's no rust in the way. There's no, that light gray isn't in the way. It's easier to see the furnace, and the fence isn't as high, so you can easily look over the fence and take pictures. And we did that also. They had a woven wire fence at the cistern, which is next to the general store. We had that, and this cistern is much deeper than it looks, by the way. We had a new fence, that same fence, we had it put around there with a walk-through gate in the back, cleaned up all the vegetation. So now we can actually get in there. We could put a ladder in there if we wanted to, and recover. If we wanted to do I would say excavation, but we could sift all the dirt. And cisterns are fascinating. Cisterns and privies are fascinating places for artifacts. So, but I haven't had the good fortune of doing a privy yet. So, here's Thomas Tennessee Watson's grave, his monument. He's got a big pillar. You could barely tell it was in the woods if you were walking by it. We actually ended up cutting some of these trees out to daylight it a little bit. And we used a chemical called D2 biological. It's a pH neutral chemical. It's made for cemeteries. If anybody in this room is interested in cemetery cleanup or cemetery preservation, that is the go-to chemical you'll want to get. It's D2 biological. You can almost spray it on and walk away. It takes care of lichens, molds. It's good for marble. It won't harm the marble. Just don't do it right before a freeze. I mean, you have freeze-thaw issues is a problem. But it cleaned up really well. We put some scaffolding up, and I actually built a new, I just owned it, I guess. I built a new fence around it. When you go look at it, it's a terrible looking fence. I'm not a carpenter, but it looks at least as good as that one. And the idea was there's a little bit of graffiti. Somebody actually made a cartouche on this thing. I don't know when it was done, but it's somebody's initials. So there is a little graffiti. So that's just to keep them from people from getting too close to it and scribing. It's marble, it's soft, so we don't want that graffiti. Speaking of graffiti, nobody liked 2020. They sure didn't. So I've taken the liberty of, shielding us from some of it, but you get the idea. It wasn't Go 2020, it was something else. So somebody decided to tag it with this blue paint, and they actually did it in the middle of the road too. I didn't get a picture. The road's not mine. I don't care about the road, but I cared about this. And it's wet right now because I used a chemical called elephant snot. That's the name of it, and it, as you can imagine, if you can imagine what that might be like, it's exactly the consistency that you would think. But it's this high viscosity chemical and it's not terribly abrasive, or it doesn't it doesn't hurt if you get it on you. It's not good, but it's not a bad chemical to use for things like stone. It did take a while and several attempts to get it all off, and it's still, if you know where to look, you can still see some of the blue paint left. The guy, or I say guy, whoever it was, got inside as well and tagged the inside. So what we did, and I was staying that tour, taking a look at that open space, we had this limestone block placed in there, and we did it on both sides. You could get access to both sides of this thing, and it's actually serving two purposes. One, it's keeping, all the little small critters can still get in there, snakes and spiders and the squirrels and everything that we want to get in there. They can get in there and have fun, but nobody's going to be able to squeeze through there, not even a little kid. But this right here, this has been buckling for many years, even as long as I've been here. I've been here 10 years. So it's not going to get any better. So this is going to serve two purposes. It's also going to eventually hold that weight and arrest that weight, hopefully. So this kind of takes us into some of the, this is kind of also preservation, but interpretation. All of our furnaces do have historic markers. Well, I'll say all of them. I'm not sure if Peytona does. Empire does, but it's off of LBL. Actually, I want to say the Great Western Furnace is off of LBL as well. It's actually somewhere in Trigg County. It's in a spot that's not on LBL much. There's been, when TVA first took over, there was some contention. They paid for it. They didn't want TVA to have the marker. These things aren't cheap, so I understand completely. They do cost about $3,000, I think, for a new one. But Laura Furnace has one. The Great Western Furnace, we just replaced the pole on it. So these things fall over once in a while, so we do some preservation work on those to maintain them. We usually work with DOT for Tennessee, and then the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet in Kentucky to have the poles replaced. Right now, I think it's Mammoth Furnace is not up. That one is still down from the tornado. So eventually we'll have that back up as well. We do a geocache every year. If you're interested in geocaching, we're getting ready to start one very soon. But we do at least 6 locations, 2 in each county. And one year we highlighted the iron furnaces, and that was a lot of fun. So this was the geocache that was at the Fulton Furnace. And I'm not sure which one this was. I think this might have been the Iron Mountain Furnace. So we took people to the furnaces. A couple of them were easy to get to. Fulton's not so easy. Mammoth, somebody put that one on an island. It was all good in the winter when the water came up, so we had to move that one. But we give out a coin if you find all 6 of them, there's a little tree tag in there. You bring the tree tags, all 6 of your tree tags are numbered so that we know which ones you've been to. So you can't just grab 6 out of one of them, they're numbered. And you take them to the visitor center, and they give you a challenge coin, free, is no charge. So We have the interpretive trail. We redid the signs on those. It's time to redo the signs again, it looks like. So the signs, we're getting, some of them were beat up by trees falling on them and they were falling over, and they're that way again now. So the interpretive trail, as you can imagine, is through a little bit of woods. It's a wonderful little trail. If you've never gone hiking on LBL and you're not a hiker, this is about a quarter mile. There's one spot that goes downhill or uphill, depending on which direction you're going. You can avoid that and go the other way if you want, and you can go to that point and then turn around if you want. But it does have the charcoal hearth, which is in this spot right here. It's all beat up. This is the spot that goes up the hill. Here's where the old store and the cistern is. The Tennessee Thomas Watson's grave is there, the monument. And so you can walk it either direction. In the back side, you can see the iron furnace. You can look down on the furnace. It's a nice little trail. If you get there early in the morning, in the springtime, take a stick with you and knock down the spider webs if you're the first one to go through. Otherwise, you might stumble upon some fallow deer. They like to graze up there. There's nothing to eat up there. I don't know why. They eat the pawpaw leaves, I think. There's lots of pawpaws up there. So if you're looking for pawpaws in August and September, that's where to go. Here's the charcoal hearth mock-up. It's not in good shape right now, so if you walk the trail, you're going to look at it and you're going to feel very disappointed. I was sick to my stomach when I looked at it. We did some preservation work on it and had this patched, and spots like this all over the back side of it, we had it patched up, and it wasn't looking too bad, and all of a sudden the tree fell on it. So a future work we'd like to do, I've got this hypothesis really that slag should show up in something like magnetic resonance or flux gate gradiometer or something like that. I haven't had a chance to test that yet, so I'm hoping one day I can get somebody out to test that. But we know where the community is at Center Furnace. We don't really know where the community was at Mammoth Furnace or Laura Furnace. We can make some guesses. And that's the best we can do, really. We can do some random shovel testing through the woods, but the topography changes. We have plowing that's done in the fields, and so. But I think if we do this magnetic resonance testing, that's going to show us the gaps in the slag. And so, if you can imagine, you've just built this new furnace, and your community builds up around it. You produce an iron, and it rains, and it's muddy, and you're like, hey, let's use the slag, we'll bust it up into gravel, and then we'll keep our boots on. And then you get slag roads and trails, but you're not going to have the slag where the houses were and where the buildings were. So now the buildings are all gone, so where the gaps in the slag is, should be where the buildings are. That's my hypothesis anyway. Another thing I'd like to do is the slag itself. I mentioned earlier that it's blue, which is really interesting. I see this, I've seen blue slag out of some furnaces in Great Britain. I'm thinking it has to be something in the limestone, like a copper sulfate or something like that, that's creating that blue tint. I don't know why or how chemically. I'm an archaeologist, not a mineralogist, but it's interesting. I would like to get some samples from each of our furnaces and then do some. They have a little device. It looks like a phaser gun from Star Trek. It's called a portable XRF. And it's an X-ray, it bounces X-rays off the surface of an artifact. It'll tell you what it's made of. If it's made of metal, it'll tell you all the percentages of the metal, how much nickel, how much this, how much that. I don't know if this is the kind of thing that if slag is the kind of thing it'll pick up or not. There's some minerals and some elements it doesn't do so well with. So, but it'd be fun to do that and test it, and then go someplace like Alabama and Pittsburgh and places like that and get their black slag and test that and see what the difference is. I'm really curious. And then we've got a bunch of other stuff we'd like to do too. The African American community that was around the Center Furnace, we're fascinated with that. We want to know what happened to those folks, where they went, when did they leave? We can guess at it, as best we can. The Kentucky Woodlands Wildlife Refuge came to be in right around 1938, and from there to about 1964, that was Kentucky Woodlands Wildlife. So at some point they got pushed out either, and it had to be right around that time or between 1912 and then, because we know from oral histories that they were there still in 1912. So it's interesting. So that is pretty much my talk for the evening. Hopefully I didn't bore anybody to tears. I find this stuff fascinating. I'll nerd out about it all night long if you let me. My name is Carl Feagans. I'm the archaeologist there. My boss is Chris Thornock. He's the Heritage Program Manager. I row the boat so he can shoot the ducks, basically. So if you need to contact us for anything, there's our emails and phone numbers.